Hello and welcome back. It's exciting to talk to you guys again. Lot going on. Actually, everyone involved in tonight's broadcast is getting ready to go to Freyfaxi at Baldershof this weekend. So you've got time, but not much time. If you'd still like to consider going, please make sure you reach out to your folk builder. But yeah, it'll be going on Friday, Saturday, and finishing up on Sunday. And I'm looking forward to seeing everybody there. It's going to be great this year. We've got a record number of pre-registrations, so it should be a lot of folks, and it's a great chance to meet other AFA members and worship our gods and worship Balder at his Hof. So if you can make it out there, it's definitely worth your while. Another order of business, I guess, while we've got everybody at the top of the hour, if you can make it out to Montana for Freyr's Harvest Feast, that's going to be going on next month, 22nd through the 24th. It's going to be held on the homestead of one of our apprentice folk builders there, Tyler Heinlein. And yeah, we're pretty excited about that. It should be a great event. We've got a lot of interest so far. So if you're a member and you want to be part of that, you're welcome, and reach out to your folk builder. It'll get you all squared away. And if you're not a member, you can still go. Just make sure you talk with folk builder first so they get you all squared away, and make sure you're not dangerous to be around. Raises another question. If you are listening to this and you are not a member, ask yourself why. If there is a legitimate reason that you don't qualify for membership, fair enough. And we appreciate anybody who wants to listen to this broadcast. You're welcome to do so. But if you do qualify for membership, we would love to have you part of the family. We're doing this together. We're doing big things, and we need all of our folk that are true to our gods to join us and be part of this historic endeavor that we're doing. So please do consider joining the AFA at runestone.org. As always, remember to like, share, and subscribe any place you find this broadcast. We are going to be every Friday, I believe we're out on Spotify as a podcast, but we are live every Wednesday at 6 Pacific on YouTube, Entropy, Odyssey, Rumble, Twitter, and VK. So all of those places, you can find us there. And hello to any of our folk that are watching on any of those different places that we're being broadcast. So if you want to be involved in super chats or any kind of monetized questions, or just throwing us a tip here and there, you're welcome to do that on Entropy and on Rumble. Those are always much appreciated. And also figure I'd go through a few financials at the top of the show. So we are still, I mentioned this last week, we're still trying to raise funds for a zero-turn mower to mow all of the tall grass out at Sigerheim. It's important we keep the place beautiful. It's also important we keep down on bugs and other things and keep it usable, because this year, for the first time, we're going to host winter nights at Sigerheim. So we got the graphic up. We've raised $1,270 out of a total of $3,099 we need. So thank you so much to everybody who has donated. And yeah, if you're interested in donating, Nick will throw the link up there on the screen for you. And we always appreciate you guys' generosity. Trying to give it a second for the link to pop up. But yeah, so there we go, donate on the Runestone site. And we have a number of different things there. I'm going to go over a couple of other things just because I figured everybody might like to know. I know there's curiosity. And over the past couple of weeks, people have been asking some questions. One thing on everybody's mind, they want to know when we are getting Freys Hof. we are making tremendous progress on that. We're very excited to make that happen. As I've said, though, it's a long process, and the first step to get Phrasehoff is to pay off Njordshoff. So everybody knows where we're at on that. We got the graphic up now. If you see that dark green area, that's showing that we've paid off about 60% of our total. And that's really amazing considering it's been just exactly a year this month since our grand opening at Njordshoff. So we've made tremendous progress thanks to y'all and your generous donations. So you guys know we've paid down $138,839.37 off of a total of $245,000. So that means and I know it's funny, we only have, it's a substantial chunk, but it is, about 40% of what that total is. We only have 106,160.63 to go. So if anybody is keeping track and anybody's an AFA member, that means if each of our members were to pay $120 today, we would be free and clear, and we'd move on to the next phase of getting Phrasehoff. But anybody wondering, our plan is and has always been to get Phrasehoff in Eastern Ohio or Western Pennsylvania. And just giving you guys an insight on where we're at on that. If you're interested in contributing, we've got that same donate link. We'll give you that option. And then because we're also looking at it and people are curious, I want to show you the progress on paying off Sigerheim. Now, this is getting all done completely separately. As you can see on the graphic, we only got about 15% in on that. So we still got quite a ways to go. Total that the property cost us was $250,000. We are $34,735.87 into that. But yeah, that was just some insight for people who were curious because we got some questions on that. And thank you to everybody who's donated to those things. I think that's all the business we got for the top of the hour. We have a treat today. For the very first time, we're welcoming Apprentice Folk Builder Cody Clausen as our guest. Cody, welcome. It's good to have you. One thing that I like to ask all of our guests when it's their first time on, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with Asatru generally and how you found the Asatru Folk Assembly?
Sorry, my kids are being loud. Yes. So I grew up evangelical Christian, and high school I kind of started questioning some stuff. It was something just didn't click with me, and so after high school I kind of went through an atheist phase and kind of into an agnostic phase, and I'd always been really interested in different mythologies. I did a lot of studying of the Greek mythologies, and that just didn't seem like it didn't fit. And so I started looking more into Norse mythology and finding out that people do still practice. And so that kind of led me to Asatru, and it was early August of last year. We had been talking off and on about joining the AFA. We'd heard about it back in 2016, and I kind of bought into some of the media's lies about us. And I had a job where I needed federal security clearance because I worked in a federally regulated building. And so I was real nervous about that, decided we weren't going to join. And last year I actually started listening to Victory Never Sleeps, and it was Whit and Brandy Callahan saying, Asatru is literally your birthright. And at that moment, I realized none of that matters anymore. We're just going to go ahead and join. And so we went ahead. I pulled over on the side of the road because I was driving my truck trying to get home, and I just pulled into a rest area, went ahead and put in my application, and and then it was probably a month and a half later where we decided we were going to start folk building as well.
Well, that's fantastic. We're really glad to have y'all. Yeah, you and your wife, Allie, who's been a guest on the program already, have made a tremendous impact in a very short amount of time. Those of you who may not know, it's another piece of business I suppose I should have mentioned at the top of the program. Since last time we spoke, our store at runestone.org is back up and running. And that's getting run out of Cody's household. Allie is taking that on. And it's a little bit early to make judgments, but so far, so good. So far, she's doing a great job. And I have every reason to believe that'll continue. So, anybody who was curious, that is back up and running now. I apologize. It's been down for about a month and a half because the person who ran it before left the AFA and abruptly. So we were in kind of a scramble to get it situated, but it's in good hands now. So without further ado, Cody, can you assume that people listening have never heard of him before? Can you give people the information you have on Asatru hero John Yeowell, also known as Stubba?
Absolutely. So John Yeowell went by Stubba. He was born John Leslie William Yeowell in April 10th of 1918. He passed away in September 25th, 2010. We don't really know a lot about his early life. There's really not anything about where he grew up, who he was as a child and into a young adult. But we do know a lot more about his adult life. For instance, he was a war veteran. We believe he served in the Spanish Civil War sometime between 1936 and 1937 in General Owen Duffy's Green Shirts. It's not confirmed, but it is a reasonable assumption given the information we have. He did serve 2 terms in the French Foreign Legion. We don't know too much about his first term, but we do know much more about his second term. He served in the 77th Indian Infantry Brigade in Burma between 1943 and 1944, and that was a kind of a special ops type deal. They would go behind Japanese lines and do covert operations that way. He rejoined the French Foreign Legion after World War II. We can't confirm it, but the time period that he would have served, they were heavily involved in the First Indochina War between 1946 and 1954. We believe it would have been that later part where he would have served. He left military service in the early mid-50s and ended up taking a leading role in the Royal Stuart Society, which is a neo-Jacobite society that believes the House Stuart has the rightful claim to the throne instead of House Windsor. He met John Gibbs Bailey, also known as Hoskell, in the late 50s, and that's where he learned a lot about Odinism. Um, he that's kind of who guided him into that path. Um, they ended up forming the London Odinist Committee for the Restoration of the Odinic Rite, which everyone kind of shortened down to the Odinist Committee in 1973, and that was their way of preparing for what would become the Odinic Rite. They would lay down a lot of how the organization would run, a lot of the ceremonies and things like that. Um, he did have a long history founding and running organizations, um, and that kind of helped. We don't know too much about those besides the Royal Stuart Society. He also went back and examined a lot of the other Odinic groups and the proto-Odinic groups that came before them, see what they did right, what they did wrong, why it didn't last, to kind of avoid those pitfalls. Around this time is when he and Hoskold wrote out the 9 Noble Virtues that they follow. Hoskold had 8 of them, and Stubba believed that they needed that 9th one to bring to that Odinic number. They created the runic era dating system for it, that they wanted to show it was that Odinism was a pre-Christian religion. What Stubba had decided on was their calendar started 250 BC, which at that time would have been the earliest known appearance of the runes. And there was the myth that was the year, around that year, that Odin came to Sweden. He ended up taking the name Stubba after forming the Odinist Committee, which came from an Anglo-Saxon chieftain in the area he lived in. He lived in Whitechapel, right on the border of another neighborhood there. The chieftain's name was Stubba. So instead of S-T-U-B-B-A, it was S-T-Y-B-B-A. And so he kind of changed it a little bit and adopted that name. He ended up becoming the outward-facing partner of the two of them, as Hoskold and his wife were quite ill at the time. And that put him in charge of the court of Gothar, the director, which don't know much about, don't know their structure really, but from what I can tell, it's kind of what the Asatru Folk Assembly had prior to introducing the Witten. He started the Raven Banner, which was a magazine, an Odinist magazine, the first one in the UK. And in 1980 is when Stubba decided that they had done enough to prepare, and they became the Odinic Rite. They believed that they restored that, and so they changed the name over. After founding the Odinic Rite, Stubba wrote several books. His most notable works were This is Odinism, Hidden Gods, The Period of Dual Faith, The Book of Bloats, The Odinist Hearth, and Odinism, Christianity, and the Third Reich. The only one that seems to be around is the Book of Bloats, and that's I mean, it's what it sounds like. It's a book of their ceremonies. He did end up making contact with several other Odinists, most notably Elsie Christensen. They had they had a lot of communication back and forth. So there was that connection to one of our other heroes. He coordinated the first campaign to protect the White Horse Stone, which is this ancient stone in England. And what was happening was when they were building the Channel Tunnel, it was supposed to go right through where this stone was. And it was very important to the Udinic rites. That was where they were holding hand fastings, ceremonies, bloats. They would regularly do moots there. So he ended up saving that. In 1989, he stepped down from his role in the Udinic Rite, placing, I believe, the current director is in his place. After stepping down, there was some internal conflict, some turmoil, members wanting things done differently than what the new director was doing, and that led to the removal of some of those members. This ended up leading to an attempt to create a new Udinic Rite, which ended up being led by Stubba. About 4 years later is when he had a change of heart. He ended up contacting their court of Gothar, asking for forgiveness, apologized, and they accepted the apology. They welcomed him back as a member, and from what I could gather, a lot of the reason that maybe this happened or why he was doing this was he had a vast collection of very rare, very valuable books that he gave to the Udinic Rite to use. And someone not affiliated with the Udinic Rite ended up destroying those through carelessness. And he felt very slighted by that. And I believe that's what led to that happening. He did suffer from terminal cancer at the end of his life, which led to him really taking a big step back from being involved in the Udinic Rite in the way that he had been. He did work on an Odinist music project with Asatru in Australia. During his cancer battle, he was providing rare vinyl records, he had sheet music, and he was going as far as typing up lyrics for them to use. That project never seemed to come to fruition. We don't have any record of it being finished. He was also working on a history of Odinism. It was going to be comprehensive, and he was contacting the Australian government for photos and documents pertaining to Alexander Rudd Mills. We do know he was nearly finished with this. Unfortunately, after his passing, it seemed to have gotten lost in the mishandling of his final will. So it may still be out there, it may not. An interesting thing about him, his funeral was conducted by a reverend, an Anglican church reverend, and his eulogy was given by Nikolai Tolstoy. So he was given a Christian funeral and cremated, and afterwards is when the Udinic Rite was able to get his remains, and they scattered him at the White Horse Stone, which is what he truly wanted to have happen. Making sure. Yeah, that's what we've got. Really, he was fairly secretive about his life, so what we do know comes from the higher ups that were with the Odinic Rite people who knew him personally, worked with him personally. Outside of that, it does not seem like he kept any record of himself.
All right. Well, thank you very much for finding that information and for presenting it to us tonight. I think a lot of our, the little bit of information that we're able to dig up is from the Odinic Rites website and from the Odinic Rite Australia website. And those two groups are not affiliated. It's unfortunate, and I say that a lot about our modern heroes, that we don't take enough care when they're with us to document as much as we can and preserve as much as we can. One of those things, as far as his effects, the book he was working on, I would love to get my hands on his book about modern Asatru history. To get that would be invaluable, and I have no idea if it even still exists. It was a situation that he didn't have living blood relatives, and unfortunately, a lot of the time, if we don't plan right, when we pass, a lot of things are mishandled. And he had, an Anglican Christian service for his funeral, which is unfortunate. All those things. It's one of the reasons why I harass you guys about getting your will done so much, is because it's very important to safeguard how those things are handled. Because unfortunately, too many people don't respect our wishes after we pass unless we make that ironclad. Nick just put up the link, but doyourownwill.com. It's legit. It is legally binding and completely legitimate to do, completely for free, anywhere in the United States. Please do that. And when you do that, please send an original copy to our law speaker, Alan Turnage, so that we can advocate for you whenever your time comes. It's really important. We continue to see people that haven't done that not be able to get what they want after they pass, so it's really important. But yeah, thank you so much for presenting things about Stubba. I've said this before, and we're still in a time where each of us individually can make such a huge contribution to this that we're doing. But even more so back in those early days of these folks that pioneered and took those first steps in reintroducing our faith. That's a lonely road, and we go into all these organizational politics and discussions. It's important to realize that the organizations of the time are tens of members, not thousands, certainly not tens of thousands. It's a lonely thing to devote so much of your adult life to in these gentlemen's time. And the fact there was so much interest, so much dedication to persevere in that so long and for so many decades is much appreciated and very important, and definitely deserves our respect and our remembrance. Let's get to some of our questions here. Your wife asks, Cody, you managed to balance long-haul trucking and folk building for quite a while. You were still able to be present for your kids and your marriage during that time. What's the secret?
Yeah, it's very hard. It's a lot of sitting on the phone. I had about 11 hours a day where I was doing nothing but driving. And so I had a headset and just sat there and talked. I mean, there were days where we'd talk for 4 hours, and it was It was especially hard in the beginning because I'd be gone for 3 or 4 weeks at a time and only have a few days at home afterwards. So being able to slowly work my way into, well, I leave out Monday, but I get home Friday, and having Saturday and Sunday kind of helped. And um, so it was hard. And the folk building aspect was a little bit easier because I've got nothing to do. I can, go ahead and give members calls. A new applicant, I can, dial them up and just talk for however long they want to talk. So that was a little easier. It was harder doing other stuff. I didn't have a lot of my own time, so I sacrificed a lot of personal time. I sacrificed some sleep to make sure that I was not only fulfilling my folk building duties, but also being a present father and husband.
All right. Sierra asks, and I'm not sure if there's an inside joke hidden here or just what. Cody, what inspired you to become a milkman?
So I haul milk for a living now. And when I first started, I made a joke about how I was the milkman now. But it was really just another thing I hadn't done in trucking. I'd done refrigerated and frozen. I hauled pig guts and pig fat for a while. I hauled hazardous materials and different liquid feeds, and so I found this job. It was home every night, and it was just something I hadn't done before. So I said, "To heck with it. Let's give it a shot."
How's that going?
It's been going really well. We had a big problem with the heat. Cattle are very, very finicky. So if it gets too hot, they may just stop producing milk. So you could go from, 500,000, pounds of milk every day to 250 to 300,000. And next thing you know, you've got, half your drivers sitting around with nothing to do. So it's been good just because I've been able to get home. It's easier to get time off, but it's definitely been an adjustment. That's one thing I didn't think I'd need to adjusted to was being home every night. There's such a big difference between how I'd lived for 2.5 years to what I'm doing now.
Well, good deal. I'm glad that's working out so well. Our next question, and I've got some things to say on this. So I've heard some people say there's a huge difference between Wotanism, Odinism, and Asatru. Would you agree or disagree? The only difference I can see is that Wotanism/Odinism is more prison outreach focused, and Asatru is more family focused. Yeah, I absolutely disagree. There's not a huge difference between any of those things. I've addressed this on the show before, but our people have this tendency to break off into increasingly small and increasingly irrelevant groups of people by each acting like they're the first to invent the wheel or like they're doing some new different take on things. And that tendency is really unfortunate. And it's in a whole lot of ways robbed our folk out of a great many things. And in modern Asatru, it has been a consistent stumbling block for us to make any progress. One of the reasons we can't have nice things sometimes, or we have fewer nice things than we ought to have, is we have this tendency to balkanize and fracture and dissipate our potential energy in a million different directions that often don't go anywhere. It's really important to me that we honor the consistent stream of our faith since, in the ancient times, but also since its reawakening. It's reawakening in Europe, in the United States, in Australia. All of those currents lead us to where we are today. There's no big official difference between Asatru Odinism and Wotanism. It's just three different kinds of people trying to rebrand what they do to be their own little thing. And I mean, we've seen that. There's Asatru and then there's not, in a similar way that there's two genders. Now, in this day and age, it gets really confusing because there's like people claiming there's 50 different things, and somebody just comes up with some new thing every day, and it doesn't change the fundamental truth of the matter. But what it does is confuse a lot of people. And I think that's what we see happening here within our faith. Everybody wants to be different and say, well, you guys practice Asatru. I'm a Norse pagan, or I'm a heathen, or I'm an Odinist. Right? All of those things chip away at the, for lack of a better term, brand integrity of what Asatru means. It's really important, something we owe our gods, our ancestors, our children, that this is something we take seriously, and this is something that is respectable, and that they has a reputation. Reputation meant everything to our ancestors. And when you divide the same thing into 10 different meaningless distinctions in order to make, one group of people feel special, you cheapen it to the general public to where they don't really understand what Asatru is and what it isn't. Well, what about all these other things? What about what this guy over here calls himself? The more we do that, we dilute the value that the word Asatru should hold. And so by that same token, honoring that collective current that's brought us here, Asatru is the name that our founder, Steve McNallen, back in 1968, I think he discovered it at that time, and then he incorporated it. His first organization was the Viking Brotherhood, but very shortly after that, in 1972, he founded the Asatru Free Assembly, which is the predecessor organization to the Asatru Folk Assembly. But Asatru was a word that Steve discovered in first book he read about this, that described our faith positively by people who practiced it. The idea that we're proclaiming our loyalty to the Aesir, as opposed to other names for it that outside groups would describe us as. None of our ancestors would have ever used the word heathen. It didn't have a meaning. Heathen meant, in contrast to the people in the cities, the people out in the heath that practiced their old ancestral faith instead of the new urban faith. And the urban centers is where Christianity spread from. Or the term pagan. Our ancestors didn't describe themselves as pagan. Early Christians described our ancestors as pagan. So that was a really important distinction. And it's the term that's won out and stood the test of time. As it stands now, that's one of the reasons, and we held off for a little while in celebrating both Haskell and Stubba, being that they were the founding fathers of the Odinic Rite, in, I guess, hopes or not knowing for sure what the fate of the Odinic Rite was. But since pretty much the turn of this century, maybe 2005 at the latest, the Odinic Rite has been almost invisible and largely non-existent. I'm told that it still exists technically as an entity, but I've seen it have no activity and become completely obscure and not have any fame anymore. And these people deserve better than that. So I want to honor their contribution to what we do and to the current that has brought Asatru to where it is today. Other than just to preach at you my idea about the importance of what's in a name, to answer your question a little bit more specifically, you can make general, I don't know, assumptions based on what people call themselves. And I think those perhaps are different in different times and different places. As it is now, I think that people in prison, or folkish practitioners in prison, are most likely to call themselves Odinist as opposed to Asatru. And again, I think that's a general rule of thumb. I don't think that's unilateral there. I think people who, and again, in anything I say here, people will chime in, no, that's not what we think. And I'm not trying to put words in people's mouths. I am trying to shed a little bit of light on the question because I think it's important. There was a time that Asatru was used by Universalists as well as by folkish practitioners. That seems to have stopped largely, except for an outside of Iceland. The Icelanders that practice Asatru, their organization, the Asatruer Félagið, is a very universal organization, and that's very unfortunate, or it certainly has become that by our day. They use the term Asatru. Outside of that, we've seen the Universalists and the leftists move very far away from using the term Asatru. They've tended to prefer using the word heathen instead, or Norse pagan, and they associate Asatru with wrong think and with all of the things that we know and love and celebrate. And so that's been a strong achievement. One of the reasons that I am so adamant in my position on it. But often people with a prison background use the term Odinist. Often people with a skinhead background like the term Odinist and prefer that term. Different people of various right-wing political stripes. Rarely, I'd say it's much rarer to use the term Wotanist and much more common to use the term Odinist. But like I said, these are all generalizations. We've always used the term Asatru. It's the banner that we are trying to get all of our folk to rally behind moving forward. And this shared movement, these founders that we celebrate as our heroes, are the common shared ancestors of our faith. And just because they may have called something they practice different, and no doubt the religion that Stubba practiced is very different from the way that we practice Asatru today in the Asatru Folk Assembly. That's because we're a living faith and we evolve over time as we get better and build a stronger and more time-tested relationship with our gods. That will always be the case, and I would imagine that 100 years from now, the AFA will have evolved to a better, more streamlined, closer relationship with the gods and a better way of practicing our faith. And I hope that always continues. Our next question, still coming early in the show. Guten Abend, gentlemen. How is y'all's night going? My night is going fantastic. I'm excited because when I get off this program, I am getting a ride to the airport and flying out to Freyfaxi at Baldershof. So I'm pretty excited. Cody, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. We drove all the way up here into Minnesota this morning, and we're excited to be at the Hof and celebrating Freyfaxi and meeting all sorts of people, a lot of new faces, a lot of old faces. And, there's just just feeling great.
Awesome. Glad to hear it. I'm trying to make sense of a question over here on the side, or it was more a note to me from Nick. Yeah, maybe when I was talking about Tyler Heinlein, who is a folk builder who is hosting Freyr's Harvest Feast in Montana. Apparently, I mislabeled what he is. I'm not sure what I said he did, but he is in fact a folk builder. Can Matt speak about the Eldry calls? Kind of, sort of. One question that was going around in the chat is, a lady, I believe in New Zealand, was commenting she didn't see a lot of older people in the Asatru Folk Assembly. And that's very much not the case. We have a very healthy amount of elders in the AFA, and we're very proud of that. We love and respect our elders so much. And one of those elders, Githia Sheila McNallen, has taken it upon herself to start a group just for our members over 50. And it's, a social media groups to where they can chat and talk regularly, and they get together, I believe, they get together weekly on Fridays to have a group video conference to talk to one another and build friendships and relate over things. When I said I can only talk on it a little bit, I've still got 8 years before I can join that group, so I don't intrude on our elders' conversation that I haven't earned by my years the right to really be in yet. But I do look forward to that when it's time to be in there. And I've heard nothing but good things from people who have participated in it. It sounds like it's a very positive thing. So please know that's out there. If you're not involved with that and you are a member of the AFA over 50, reach out to your local folk builders so they can get you squared away, get you dialed in, and get you involved with other elders like yourself in the AFA. Question. Do we have any books, pamphlets, or writings in general from Stubba? If so, is it/them available on PDF, as PDF on archive, or perhaps the Wayback Machine? Cody mentioned this a little bit in his talk, but there's one, the Book of Bloats, that is, I believe it's for sale by the Odinic Rite Australia. I think he was a contributor on some publications that the regular Odinic Rites website sells. I'm not certain. Other than that, Cody, are you aware if any of those other materials are available on PDF anywhere?
I have looked. I've got several places I usually look for this kind of stuff, and everything I've seen, we've just got the Book of Bloats. I did come across, with the help of Stian, who did Hostgold, come across the book, This is Odinism by Stubba. The issue with that is it is sold in the UK on one website. They do not do shipping outside of the UK, so getting it to the US would be fairly expensive and kind of an ordeal. But unfortunately, everywhere I've looked, that's all we've got.
All right. Next question. Cody, when did you realize us Areo folk, whites, deserve to exist as our own folk with our own culture and spirituality?
It was probably just after high school. It was when I started kind of looking into a bit of my ancestry, because like a lot of people, I'd heard we had a Cherokee princess in the in there, and turns out we didn't. And the more I looked into everything, and the more it was, you've got everybody saying, "Oh well, Asatru's for everybody, and anyone can do it." And then as soon as you mention, a Native American faith, Japanese Shintoism, any of those as closed practices, they start getting real defensive, and that's what kind of made me realize, hey, we do deserve to have our ethnic faith. There's no one who can take that away from us.
Good deal. Cody, what virtue do you think that Stubba most represented in his life? Which of our noble virtues?
Oh, that's a bit of a hard one. I would have to say maybe industriousness. He put a lot of work into forming the Odinic Rite, to the point where he created a group prior to that sole purpose was setting up for the Odinic Rite. He put in a lot of work preserving important locations like the White Horse Stone, and he even in his the end of his life, when he was sick with cancer, he was still trying to write a history, and he was working on getting a collection of Odinist music put together. And so I think that would be the one virtue that I personally believe best describes him.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that first. That's what I was going to say, and certainly that characterizes. Again, I wish we knew more, but everything we know about the man's life was, it does not seem like he was the man to sit back and wonder what could be. He was the man to go out and throw himself into the balance to see what he could make happen. I don't know the nature of his service in the British Army, whether it was compulsory or volunteer, but certainly his action in Spain was on a volunteer basis. His 2 different terms that he served in the French Foreign Legion were something he was doing as a volunteer. That was his choice to go do. And, all of those things were extremely dangerous, especially at that time period. And it sounds like throughout the rest of his life, he was part of all these different groups and organizations trying to do things he believed in. He was active in everything he was a part of. In the Royal Stuart Society, he wasn't, I think he was he was high up in that organization. He was an active mover and shaker, not just a guy who paid his dues and got a newsletter. He wanted to be very involved. And we see that right on through as long as his health permitted. So I think industriousness defines his character, certainly as it's come down to us.
Yes, he was a vice president in the Royal Stuart Society.
There we go. What obstacles did you encounter when researching Stubba, and how can we prevent that for folks that will become heroes one day?
Really, the biggest obstacle was just the sources. We have 2 sources for Stubba's life, and so that really limits what we know. And to be honest, those 2 resources, a lot of the information was either the same or very similar. There wasn't a lot of extra between the 2. So the best way I could say to prevent it, and this is something I've talked about with some of the men, is recording things. Not not just, the great accomplishments you have, some of the more mundane stuff, and record your own life. I mean, who's going to be able to tell your story better than yourself? If you've got, elderly grandparents, write down some of their stories. I just think overall, as a folk, we need to be keeping a record of these stories, keeping a record of people's lives, because otherwise we end up in a situation just like with Host Gold and Stubba, where we know some stuff, but it's such a small scope.
Yeah, I think that's really important for all of us. I think certainly that's important to keep the memories of your parents and your grandparents alive and pass those on to your children. In a broader sense, for people involved in our faith and in bigger things, one thing I wish that our folk would embrace to a higher degree than they do is reputation and fame. Reputation and fame were the keys to a successful and well-lived life to our ancestors. One of the most celebrated values of Asatru is becoming a hero by building fame, by building reputation. The Have 'em All talks about cattle die and kinsmen die, but one thing that does not die is the good reputation for one who's earned it. That's very important. And so many people today are so very scared of associating their name or their face or their identity with things that they deeply believe in. And it's very hard to internalize that, courage is only courage if there's consequence. If there's no potential consequence to a show of courage, then it's not really that courageous. There's a very important value to be learned from folks like Stubba of going out there and being counted for the things that you believe in and not just kind of casually support from a distance. The more our heroes put their names and faces on the things that they do, the easier it is to have their legacy last and have those of us who desperately want to know more about them be able to learn some about them and the life they lived and the things they accomplished. And that was the dream of our ancestors, is to be remembered and celebrated in that way. And the more folks keep their head down, the less they'll get that notoriety and celebration after they pass, unfortunately. And this is, this goes to another point, and I saw this over in the chat. People made the point that, you can worship correctly and believe the right things and be pious and faithful and call your religion, anything you want to call it by many different names. Of course you can, but that puts all the focus on the internal. You, for your own spiritual advancement, could absolutely do that. But the trouble is, when you do that, you're not building and helping the rest of us. By us all doing something under a common banner and using a name consistently and putting that brand on our good deeds and on our faith, we make it known that there's a value to that word. There's a value to that faith. It has a meaning. And when our folk are out there and they discover they don't want to be part of Christianity and they want to know what their options are, if you call what you do some obscure thing, that's one less voice in the chorus of, here's Asatru, welcome home. The more of us that label what we do very clearly and distinctly Asatru, the more that we build a value to where that has a meaning. If you go anywhere in this world and you talk about Christianity, everyone knows what you're talking about. It has a meaning. If you mention Asatru, very few do. If you mention any of the other terms for Asatru, even less understand what you're talking about. So one of the best about building reputation. If we build reputation around that word, we shape and build a place for the rest of our folk to come home to. I wonder where many of us would be if we didn't know that was the option, or we didn't stumble upon, the random YouTube video or the random article in a Google search. How many of us would have been able to find our way home? So I think that there's a tremendous value in us all being consistent in how we refer to ourselves, so that our folk know that we exist, so that society knows that we exist, and so that we can be counted and build reputation. I have a number of questions just come in. I have a question. Can we organize meetings for birthday parties between the AFA? Of course you can, but I don't think that as the whole, the entire AFA is going to do that, because, and this is a good problem to have, we just have too many members. Right now, if there's only so many days in a year, we have enough members to where we have birthdays every single day in the AFA. And we have a lot of different days that have, many birthdays stacked on them. So I think that's something that, local groups absolutely should do. And I think it's a nice thing to do. I think it's just, we've grown to a point where it would be very hard to do that as an organization, as a church. Another question. Are there a lot of young people in the AFA? Young adults, like people around their early to mid 20s? Yes, absolutely. I think that is the demographic that's had the most growth in the AFA over the last 7 years. I think that's people in that age bracket are well over half of the new applicants we get, I would say. So I think that's very, very healthy, healthily represented in our membership. And we see that a lot of places. One of the biggest things we see is just an outpouring of young families, folks in their 20s with little kids, and new young people getting married and starting families. I think that's our biggest demographic that I've seen. What have you seen in regards to demographics on that, Cody?
Yeah, I've seen it's been a lot of the early mid-20s. We do have some older members that have been joining as well, but one thing I've noticed is families. I mean, we just had a member just a couple months ago join with the family. I mean, it's been wonderful to see, and I think it's really inspiring that we've got such a wide range of ages, and I really hope it continues like that, and I'm doing what I can.
Next question. What do you think of when Universalists try to argue people of other races have experiences with the gods? I think that it is seldom useful to argue with people about things that involve their subjective experience. I don't think that they're going to listen if you just straight up say, no, you don't. I don't think that's useful. And I think that another thing, and this is out of perhaps an abundance of piety, but I don't think it's appropriate for me to say that the gods couldn't do that if they wanted to do that. But I also don't believe or see why they would do that. What I think occurs in those situations is we have a lot of people that are very confused. I think that when we have religious experience or supernatural experience in general, we put that in in the context that we're familiar with. I think that if we, if you're trying to think, and we've had this happen with people that were formerly Christian. So if they have any sort of interaction with the supernatural while they're Christian, well, it's God, it's Jesus, it's angels, it's demons. If they continue having that exact same interaction once they become Asatru, then they put that in a whole different framework. If their ancestors are interacting with them in a Christian context, I think it's much harder to accept that at face value. So I think they funnel that into guardian angels or maybe saints or whatever the case might be. And I think people do that in whatever context they find themselves. You see, especially during conversion periods, Native Americans, for example, you see them take their Native American faith and overlay that or interpret that through Christianity when they try to get converted. So there's a strange overlap, but you choose to identify things with the context you're comfortable with. I think very often if you have let's say you have a Black person that's particularly, spiritually sensitive and having interactions with something beyond the normal. If they think Vikings are really cool and are focused on trying to, Viking LARP, and that's the mythology that they're excited about, then I think they would try to force those supernatural things into those holes rather than consider their ancestors and their native gods trying to reach out to them in some way or an interaction that way. You rush to what you know, and if that's what you feel like that's the label you put on it. I think it is a big challenge, and even for us who are Asatru, to accept spiritual experience on its own terms instead of trying to force it into what we want it to be or what we happen to be most familiar with. And I think that a little bit of honesty with ourselves is really important. Fundamentally, I think that other races of people claiming to have interactions with our gods and our ancestors and our heroes are fundamentally not being honest with themselves about what spiritual experience they might be having. And I think it'd be much more fulfilling for them if they were open to the authenticity that experience might entail. What do you think on that, Cody? You have any thoughts about that?
Mostly I just agree with you, but yeah, one thing you've got to realize that our gods are, in pop culture. Depictions of our gods are in pop culture. They're, Thor and Odin, they're household names at this point. So that's going to influence somebody. They're gonna immediately be like, well, that right there, that's what I saw. So, and the other thing is there's not a lot of other large religious groups like us. There's not a lot of large folk religious groups. So, a Black guy could have these experiences, but he doesn't know his own ethnic faith. He does know this is what Odin's like, this is what Thor's like. So he's going to assign that kind of stuff to our gods. And the other problem we have is we've got people reinforcing that. Universalists are reinforcing that idea. So it's a bit of an uphill battle for us, but I have noticed that um, it's becoming less and less of a problem. It's still an issue we have, but the folk religions are actually, more readily accepted than they were just a few years ago.
All right. Next up, Mr. Clausen. Good to see you here. What are your 5 favorite books?
5 favorite books. Well, The Spear by Stephen McNallen. I got it and had it read in a few hours. It is amazing. I'm a huge fan of old westerns. So Louis L'Amour's books. He's got over 100 books he's written, and I love that stuff. I love the old West, all that Americana. Zane Grey's another really good author. Children's books, I keep going back and rereading every once in a while. The Aragon series, I grew up with that. The fantasy in it just really captured me. I loved it more than all the Harry Potter books. And then the one I'm currently reading, the Serpent of Paradise by Miguel Serrano. Really enjoying that. So,
all right. What is your favorite saga?
Oh, Volsung.
Okay. And what is your favorite hobby?
My favorite hobby, I haven't had a lot since I've been a truck driver, but I got into wood burning recently. Been loving it.
All right. There you go. We have a question coming in from a listener on Odyssey. Thank you very much to the folks out there listening on Odyssey. We appreciate you guys. It's good to get one of your questions. Okay. If packs of crows are brutally killing your newly born lamb, would Odin frown at you protecting the flock? Note, crows are very smart, and there's plenty of roadkill around the area. Cheers. I don't get to dictate what Odin would or wouldn't be upset about, but I see no reason to think that he would be upset. Because he happens to have 2 symbolic pet ravens, I don't think that he, is personally involved with every corvid out there and their scavenging experience. Honestly, no, of course, you're going to protect your stuff from anything and anyone who tries to scavenge it or tries to brutally kill it. Looking out for and protecting yours, I certainly have every reason to believe that the All-Father would understand that. Another question, also from Odyssey. Does the AFA have a wiki of sorts on our heroes and important works? No, and I don't really know how we would create one of those, but it's interesting, and I'm going to talk to our tech support people about that because it's curious. What we do have is we have a lot of information on our website. We have a library with a lot of our works there, and we also have a calendar of our holy days, both the holy observances we have rituals for, and our day, all of our days of remembrance. So at runestone.org, you can find those things. And also, like I said, we've tried to put all of the documents of the Asatru Folk Assembly that we have access to in our library. And we update that monthly with our runestones as they come out. Our runestone is our newsletter, and we have one of those now. We've grown to the point where we need 4 of those a month now, one for each of our HOF districts. Apparently my daughter is having a very rough evening. I assume she is all right. Hope she's okay in the background there. She's with her mother, so we're going to assume that's all right. Next question. What is your opinion about marriage and the relationship between men and women there? As in the marriage. Opinion on their relationship during the marriage. Okay. So a couple of general thoughts on marriage. Marriage is really important. We place a lot of value on marriage in the AFA. It's very important to us that we all have a similar idea of what that means. As a Gothi, AFA Gothar only perform legally binding marriages because that makes a difference. We take it really seriously, and as I said before, there's no courage unless there's consequence. It's very easy to make agreements, oaths, and pacts with people if they're not binding in any physical way. To our ancestors, our whole society was built around their reputation, and if they were to break oaths, they would be shunned and rejected by their society, by their village, by their tribe, by their elders, whatever the case might be. Today, we don't have that same social reaction to people who throw away what are meant to be lasting and eternal agreements. So making sure that a marriage is legally binding means that it's not something you can just quickly toss aside. There's at least a process. There's at least consequence. It's a real thing, whereas just ceremonial marriages are only as real as the couple wants them to be while they're in a good place. So that's really important. That kind of enshrines how important marriage is to us. As far as men and women's roles and relationship within the marriage, it is very, very important that each are supportive of one another and that they take active responsibility in things. Natural, traditional gender roles are important to our folk, but I don't think that has to be to a silly 1950s TV show LARP level. I think relationships between adult people have a spectrum of behavior that's appropriate and then that's not. It's really important that the man take leadership in his household and takes a leadership position in making sure that his family is functioning correctly and is spiritually fulfilled. One of the things that I've seen in modern times in a, not a theoretical way, but in a very real way, is men acquiescing to wives that perhaps aren't Asatru or don't want to raise their children in this. And men just kind of throwing up their hands and, well, we'll let them decide when they're old enough. It's your responsibility as a father to make sure your children are raised correctly to the best of your ability. And it doesn't mean avoiding difficult conversations or avoiding arguments with your wife. It means actively making sure that your children's spiritual needs are met. And that's something I've seen a lot. I think we can get into theoretical, like, man, where's the pants in the family conversations all day long. And I think in an idealized general circumstance, I think there's a truth to that. But I think this has always been the case in functional marriages that are built out of loving relationships. There's a partnership there. And I don't think that partnership ever breaks down truly 50-50. I don't think it ever breaks down 100% along stereotypical gender role lines. I think different couples have different strengths and weaknesses, but it's absolutely a wife's job to be supportive of her husband and to follow his lead in the household the best that she can. And I think it's very, very important that husbands take an active role in leading their family and making sure they're provided for physically, spiritually, emotionally, in all of those ways. Any specifics, it would come down to what the specific of the situation is for me to really be able to talk intelligently on it. Cody, do you have any insight on that?
Mostly just that, the husband and wife need to be able to play off of each other a lot, especially in an age where, maybe the husband can't, fully support, a family just on their income. So I think it's really important that you find your strengths and your weaknesses and kind of go from there, because otherwise you could end up pretty unhappy in your marriage.
All right. So next question, why do you guys dress in button-ups and ties? I like it, just wondering the motivation. Why do other groups dress in Iron Age garb? I'm glad that you asked the question. We dress in, button-up shirts, ties. Our ladies wear dresses. We'll wear suits. I'll be wearing a suit this weekend when I'm at the Hoff, because that's what serious or formal Western dress is. Culturally in the West, that's how it's evolved when you're at something that you take seriously. If you're going to a wedding, if you're going to a funeral, and this is certainly people do this when they go to church, but the reason isn't because Jesus says you need a suit and tie. The reason is when white people dress nicely to do something they take seriously, this is what they do. You do it if you're going to have an interview. You do it if you're going to go to court. You do it if you're going to go to, your grandmother's birthday party, perhaps. You do it when you're going to an event that's important to you. And there's nothing that's more important than representing our gods and our faith, or going to a house of worship to do worship to our gods. And it's the same principle that our ancestors followed as well. It talks about when they were to go to the thing or the law assembly, or when they would go to bloat, they would wear their best attire. They would wear their finest attire. Now, in 700, that attire looked very different than it does in 2023. And perhaps, 1,000 years from now, the style of formal dress will look different as well. And that's okay. One of the reasons, and this goes to answering the second part of your question, we dress like this because this is a living faith. Our ancestors dressed in the height of fashion and what was appropriate during the time that they lived in. Other groups, I think other groups get caught up in a mindset of seeing our faith only through the lens of ancient peoples. And that was a stage that, many people in the Asatru Folk Assembly in the very early days went through. But our faith is living and just as relevant today as it was to our Viking ancestors, as it will be to our spacefaring descendants, as it was to Neolithic of our folk much before the Viking Age. It's important to realize that, a Viking Age Gothi didn't dress up like a caveman to be more spiritual. He was dressing in a modern way for the time period in which he lived. And I think that's what people who are serious about their faith as they grow and mature in it come to. You don't see Christians dressed up in sandals and first century Judean man dress garbs when they go to church, unless they're, in some kind of a Christmas play or something. The reason is because their faith is a living faith, and they don't see their God and their faith as only existing in an ancient period of time. I think it's really important for our folk that we see the relevance of our faith in our everyday modern existence. And the way you dress affects a lot of things. So that's why I think it's more important to dress in a modern, formal way than in a how you suspected the Vikings used to dress when they were trying to get fancy. But then comes the difference of dressing nice versus dressing very, very casually. And you dress nice because we take it serious and it's important. You dress nice for the same reason you dress nice for any other occasion you dress nice to, because you think the occasion is important and because you want to impress the persons that are at the event. We want to impress our other folk by looking our very best, but we also want to impress our gods by showing them our very best selves. It's something that we owe them, and it's something we owe each other. And you take yourself much more seriously. You conduct yourself differently. You bring a whole different energy when you look good and you're dressed well than when you're dressed slovenly and you look like you didn't take a lot of care in your appearance. And so that's certainly a truth that we found. Same guy who had the question. I'm sorry, I can't really make out the name. I assume it's a gentleman. It might be a lady. I've Slavic pagan groups wear white and red tunics, floral crowns, and Hellenic groups wear white togas looking garb. That's not LARPing with a question mark. Would a uniform look of tradition since bring unity and uniformity? All right, I think there's some just translation stuff, but I think I'm getting what's getting put down there. No, I think that the white and red Slavic garb is really beautiful. You see that in a much more modern way than certainly you see the faux Viking tunics. No, I don't think that's LARPing at all, because I think that cultural dress has maintained its importance in Slavic countries up to our day. So I think it is cultural, but I think that it's still relevant in a modern world. And I think that when people look on, it doesn't look silly and ridiculous. When people see people in the United States dressed in pretend Viking outfits to practice their faith, it looks silly, and it brings laughter and ridicule upon us by society at large that sees it, because it looks like we're acting. It doesn't look like we're participating in a real legitimate faith. I assume that in Greece, if you are wearing a toga, that's not in any way a current modern dress. And I think that does look LARPy and anachronistic. But I think that your Slavic situation is really different. I think it'd be similar in a lot of ways to if you're in Bavaria and you're wearing lederhosen. Yes, it's old-timey dress, but it's not completely inappropriate. There's still a modern cultural context for that makes it not look ridiculous. I think that for Celtic people, wearing a kilt can look very dressed, very nice. People often wear kilts to weddings. Again, it's cultural and it's an older way of dress, but it's not out of use, and it's not pretending that you live in a different time period. And it's not the intentional dressing up as a person of a different age. It has an entirely different meaning. So that's I don't know. Cody, have you encountered people dressing in Viking age garb in your journey in Asatru?
Yeah, I've met my fair share of people who did that. I was one of those people who thought, hey, I need to bring a drinking horn everywhere I go. So I had one that hung from my belt every single day. I got rid of that pretty quick, but yeah, it's pretty common.
And that's something, folks that are listening, that you'll find in universalist groups often. You don't find that in folkish Asatru groups hardly ever anymore. You certainly don't find that in the AFA, but if you go to those lefty groups, you do. And one thing that characterizes the typical person that does that is a lack of seriousness. And you don't see that the same across the board. And this has very much been my experience over the last 20 years. And I think there's a lot to that. I think at an earlier stage in Asatru's development, I think that's a phase a lot of people went through. But fortunately, our predecessors went through that, so we don't have to reinvent that wheel. We can continue to advance the way that we are. That's our last question we have up for the evening. It's been great talking with everybody. I look forward to this every week. It's been great having you on, Cody. Thank you so much for coming on and educating us all about Stubba. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been nervous but really excited. So,
no, you did a great job. It'll be nice to have you on again sometime. And I look forward to seeing you and your family here tomorrow. So
yes,
we'll see you guys then. We're going to have an amazing Freyfaxi at Baldershof. I hope y'all are able to join us.
Come on out. It's going to be a wonderful time.
So we got one last question, and it's worth throwing in there. Gentlemen, what can we do to unite all decent folkish groups under the Tri-Horn banner? Talk sense into them and get them to join the AFA. Tell them about the good things that we have going on. And the biggest thing, we are doing amazing things. We're doing things that are really special. I want everybody who wants to be a part of that. We can accomplish so much more united than we can in a bunch of different little backyard groups. The AFA has been leading the way. We are currently leading the way. We're continuing to lead the way. We are so much stronger when everybody gets on the team. If you want to be involved in something, don't wait for perfect. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Be part of what we're doing and help us to grow and develop in the right way. Help us to achieve the dreams that we all so much want to achieve. We're doing great, but we'd be doing even better if you were with us. So we invite you guys, if you're hearing this and you're eligible, please join the Asatru Folk Assembly. We would love to have you part of our AFA family. And like I said, we are so much stronger moving forward united. All right, guys. Hail the gods, hail the folk, hail the AFA, and remember that victory never sleeps.